New Hello, everybody, and welcome to History Matters. And so does coffee. Um, Coffee's had a lot to say to me over the last few days. Thank you, coffee. Um, what we're going to be talking about today, which should be no surprise, is the Supreme Court decision on immunity, presidential immunity, and what it means. And before I even go into that, I turn to my wonderful partner in crime, Annie, who will explain the rules of the game.
Well, good morning, everybody, and happy 4th. I hope everybody had a good time yesterday. I am delighted to be with you as every Friday, and this is how this works. If this is your first time, first of all, please let us know in the chat so we can welcome you. Joanne's going to talk about today's topic for about 30 minutes, and then I'll be back. I will be checking for your questions related to today's topic down in the Q&A, and we'll have a discussion in about a half an hour. So we'll see you then.
Okay, and indeed, as Annie just said, please, if you're here for the first time, put it in chat because it's an amazing community of people that has built up here over the course of the last 222 episodes. This is the 223rd, which is shocking. I say that every week, but it is. But at any rate, let's go on to the topic. I had no problem deciding what I was going to talk about this week with you. Presidential immunity. That Supreme Court decision, I'm going to search for the right word to express what it is. Stunning in not a good way. Shocking in a sense. I suppose we might have expected something, but this is more sweeping, perhaps, than we might have expected. And I've said in any number of places online, as I'm ever unwisely doing, posting all over social media, I've talked about the ways in which this pretty fundamentally changes the nature of the presidency, and in that sense, the nature of the nation, certainly the nature of how democracy works within our country. And of course, I've had a lot of people, well, not a lot, depends on where I am, on Twitter, a lot of people saying, no, it hasn't. Rumble, rumble, grumble, grumble. No, it hasn't. Right? Or other people saying, it's not that different from how we've always had it. Well, it does change things. That's part of what we're going to talk about today. And although, yes, presidents have had a lot of power and haven't often been pursued for the way that they use that power, what this Supreme Court decision has done is basically given permission to use power in extreme ways with no accountability before the law for official acts. What are official acts, you may ask? Well, that's kind of vaguely described. There's a lot of wiggle room in the definition, which is problematic, right? So who knows what is official or isn't, which in and of itself is power granting. There are also explicit things that are said to be out of bounds to consider if you're thinking about something that the president's doing that is incorrect. For example, talking to the Justice Department, planning things with the Justice Department, those plans, documents that come out of those plans, sorry, they can't be considered for criminal prosecution. Not only are they official acts, but off the table. Now, that's problematic because the Justice Department is supposed to be independent. It's not supposed to be a tool of the president. It's supposed to be the Department of Justice, right? And although certainly presidents and the department have conversations, but it's what this decision from the Supreme Court has done specifically is said, free reign, you can do whatever you want. Official duty, core duty of the president. So it is a big deal. And it, among other things, and I encourage you, if you haven't already, to read Justice Sotomayor's dissent. It's very clear and very dramatic, not in a bad way, but in a necessary way. She just lays it out as she sees it as it is. I'm going to come back to this because there was like a little gendered slap at her and the other woman justices who protested against what happened, but we'll come back to that. It's a big deal. It puts the president above the law for his official acts, ill-defined, we don't know what they are. And by putting the president above the law, it puts him, or maybe someday in the future, her, above us. Kings, sometimes I can't believe the kind of conversations that we have here, just because how is this actually happening? Kings are immune, they have power, they can do what they like. They don't have really accountability in the sense that an American president always had, not simply with impeachment, but also with criminal prosecution. See if I can find this really quickly. The Federalist essay, here we go. Look at this. I think I opened right up to it. Hamilton in Federalist number 69. And I should say, if you're looking for a framer or a founder who wanted a really powerful executive, Hamilton's your guy. Hamilton at the time was called a monarchist because he seemed to want such a powerful executive. And even he thought that the American national executive should be restrained in some ways. Here's what he wrote in Federalist number 69 when he's writing about the presidency. He says, and this is pretty blunt, the president of the United States would be liable to be impeached, tried, and upon conviction of treason, bribery, or other high crimes or misdemeanors, removed from office, and would afterwards be liable to prosecution and punishment in the ordinary course of law. The person of the King of Great Britain is sacred and inviolable. There is no constitutional tribunal to which he is amenable, no punishment to which he can be subjected without involving the crisis of a national revolution. In this delicate and important circumstance or personal responsibility, the president of Confederated America would stand upon no better ground than a governor of New York, and upon worse ground than the governors of Virginia and Delaware. In other words, this new national executive not only is not a king, but there are even governors that one could say have greater powers. They explicitly are talking about Hamilton, and then generally at the time were very focused on and talked about the power of the executive. It was a major concern because, as we celebrated yesterday, it was not all that long into the past before the writing of the Constitution that the colonies had broken away from the mother country. In a large part, first they appealed to Parliament. When Parliament didn't address their concerns as they wanted, they then went directly to the king as their last hold to royal government and to the British Empire. And the king did not basically listen to what they were saying, and then began to state that the colonies were in a state of rebellion and began to send punishments. We know the story of the revolution. But the Declaration of Independence, when you read it, really, it's an ode against monarchy. If you think about it, which is the irony of this decision coming down now. The Declaration of Independence, we focus on the lofty beginning, talking about principles and ideals, life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness. But the actual meat of the Declaration of Independence, and particularly at the time, the part that carried the heft was all of the he hases that follow that opening. It's a series of what the king has done. He has, all of those things to the colonists, things that he shouldn't have done, and that are in one way or another are a misuse of power and or justice. So the Declaration of Independence is an attack on an unrestrained monarch who in their minds was doing something unfair. I don't even know, irony doesn't suit the moment. It's too weak a word to describe what it means to give the president of the United States immunity on a day centered on a document that said, we don't want a monarch with immunity. There's someone who's done horrible things to us, and we're going to do something different here. And that's throughout the early America, throughout the 1770s, 80s, 90s, when they're really creating processes of government, in one way or another, Americans wanted something different. And we've talked about this before. They weren't always in agreement or absolutely sure what different meant. They knew they didn't want that, right? We don't want a king. We don't want what they're doing in Great Britain. What does that mean? Well, unclear. And that, some of the conflict in the 1790s, particularly, centers on what exactly is happening in the United States of America. But there was never a question that there was concern about the national executive. You can look at the records of the Constitutional Convention and see the debate about the national executive and some of the fears. You can see some of those fears reflected in the Federalist essays. They were so concerned about an excess of executive power that they even discussed during the Federal Convention having an executive panel rather than one president. They were nervous about giving the amount of power that they were granting to one man, and they thought, well, maybe if we have a panel, then no one man will have all of that power, which on the one hand is true, but on the other hand, as people said at the time, actually I have to believe Hamilton says it in a Federalist essay, the problem with that is that one guy can hide behind another guy. We'll never know who actually committed a crime or injustice. So that actually is probably not the best idea. We should have one single executive who can be held responsible for his actions because it will be clear that he committed them. So fear of executive power, concerns about executive power, careful writing of and deployment of the bounds of that power. That's what the founding period, what a lot of it is about. Now, the flip side of that is the fact that government, as they understood it, the nation as they understood it, was grounded on us, on public opinion. That was something that they saw as distinctive in the new United States. That's the flip side of executive power. So we want an executive president, ultimately, who's bound in and restrained by things. Why? Because the people, that person needs to be accountable to the people. And one way in which a president is held accountable is the rule of law. If a president commits a crime, and particularly if a president commits a crime having to do with the electoral process, then the rule of law is a way that a president can be held accountable. And in holding presidents accountable, that's for the larger good. That's at least how it's supposed to work. So when I've said, that Supreme Court ruling is dangerous and bad and fundamentally transforms the presidency and our government, I mean it. And, how to put this? There have been many times in the last 222 episodes where we've had a moment of crisis. And we've come here together and we've discussed the crisis and talked about options. And even just in that process, sort of felt like we were getting our arms around the moment. And I have to say, in this case, this is a crisis. This is a fundamental change that gives the president a remarkable range of power with no accountability to the law or us, and even hems in the few ways that a president can be held accountable. As I said a moment ago, one thing, official acts, not really defined. But let's see here. I want to go on. I wrote this. Okay, so here we go. You can't consider the president's motives when deciding what's official or unofficial, right? So you can't say, well, this person was out to clearly wanted to void an election. Well, the motives, we just have to look at the acts, right? Again, that's reining in, that's tightening the possible way of holding a president accountable. The testimony or private records of the president or the president's advisors about official acts can't be used to prove his guilt. Again, even a smaller way in which you can possibly prosecute a president. So basically, as written, as devised, the Supreme Court decision makes it very, very difficult for a president to be held legally accountable for use of official power. And here we have Justice Sotomayor, here she is. I want to quote her because she did it so wonderfully. Okay. She says that the decision effectively creates a law-free zone around the president, upsetting the status quo that has existed since the founding. Orders the Navy SEAL Team 6 to assassinate a political rival, immune. Organizes a military coup to hold on to power, immune. Takes a bribe in exchange for a pardon, immune, 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 immune. In every use of official power, the president is now a king above the law. And strikingly, as many people commented in reading her dissent, typically when there's a dissent to a Supreme Court case, it's signed respectfully. Justice Sotomayor signed hers by writing, "With fear for our democracy, I dissent." That's a slap, a deliberate slap, a smack in the face at something that is shockingly undemocratic. Neil Katyal, the legal authority who's argued many, many times in front of the Supreme Court, said somewhere in public semi-recently, he has never seen a dissent conclude in that way. That's extreme. So this actually is a crisis. I don't want us to, as I said last week, when in trouble, when in doubt, run in circles, scream and shout. Not helpful. But it is important that we are here together recognizing the fact that this allows for dangerous developments. And part of the danger of that is a presidential candidate who has already been talking about the many ways in which he wants to do things. And he talks about retribution. That's what he wants, right? If he becomes president, he wants revenge, he wants retribution. This decision makes that easier. But even without his presence, this changes the nature of the presidency, its power, its reach, its limits. So when I say that this decision really fundamentally strikes at democracy and the nature of our government, it really does. It really does. And I'm not saying this to alarm everyone, but it's a shocking, shocking decision that went even further than some people thought the decision would go. Even people who thought maybe there'll be some form of immunity, this decision went beyond that. I do want to make one point because I sensed it as a woman, public figure of some sort, authority, historian, because people do this all the time. I don't know if you picked up on how Chief Justice Roberts responded to the dissents, like Justice Sotomayor's. He accused those dissent pieces of being, quote, fear-mongering on the basis of extreme hypotheticals, right? Oh, they're just making up stories. Pushing that a little further, on CNN, Donald Trump's former White House counsel, Ty Cobb, said, quote, her dissent, oh, this is about Sotomayor, her dissent was a little hysterical. Ooh, that word, folks. So the underpinning here, because the dissent was from women, is that they're hysterical, right? They're screaming, they're women. What they're saying really shouldn't be taken seriously. Now, we just think about Roe and all the ways in which people beforehand, women particularly, said, you know, it's going to go, and if it goes, that's dire, and we're dismissed for being hysterical. When a Supreme Court justice writes an opinion of this sort with the gravity that she did, and it's dismissed as hysteria, those are people who are not ready to take the moment, the decision, or any woman really seriously. So that's like an extra bonus way in which this smacks at a lot of things. And I want to make it clear that there are ways in which presidents in the past have made really strong use of executive power. So it's not as though suddenly there will be new ways. Well, there will be new ways. It's not as though suddenly for the first time, presidents are exercising this kind of power. And this is all from online. A professor of government at American University named Chris Edelson, who wrote a book titled, appropriately enough, Power Without Constraint, the Post 9/11 Presidency and National Security. He says that, yes, in modern history, presidents have exercised power without meaningful restrictions. What's different now is the court has now endorsed that. And we have a candidate for president who has made clear he will seek to rule as a dictator. Beyond extreme language, I almost want to apologize for saying it, but I think, unfortunately, it's accurate. Now, I encourage you to read a few things to decide what you think, to weigh what's happening, to inform yourself about what's happening. One of the things, and I mentioned it before, was the amicus brief for the Supreme Court by the Brennan Center for Justice that a group of historians, early American historians, wrote. I signed on to it, and it is a really clear, straightforward, brief explanation of why presidential immunity makes no sense. And interestingly, the people who wrote that brief, there was a meeting after the decision was announced, obviously, and we acknowledged that in the final decision, a lot of the ways in which that amicus brief had said, well, this isn't right and this isn't right, had been pared away. So whether the brief had an impact, I don't know, but it certainly seems to have hemmed in how the argument was made in support of immunity. Now, that said, there's no constitutional basis for it, right? So if we said there's no basis for it, the court said, yeah, you're right. There isn't really. We have to like sort of read between the lines. There is no real basis for it. This is not a good thing, but still. So anyway, I encourage you to read that brief, and I'm sure our wonderful experts can find it and post where you can find it in chat. I encourage you to read a piece that was posted by Thomas Wolfe, who led the effort for this, of the Brennan Center, who led the effort for this brief. He wrote a very clear, basic statement about what this means. Even he was surprised at how far it went. And he says, the court has created an elaborate system of ambiguous rules that will not only ratchet up the complexity of the case against Trump, but erode the checks on presidential illegality generally. It is both a roadblock to prosecution and an encouragement to more insurrection. Trump has been charged with attempting to overthrow the election that threw him out of office. Any rule that would grant a president immunity for that crime would remove the principal check on presidential abuses of authority in our democratic system, the vote. This is the most obvious thing in the world to say. This is serious stuff, folks. It's why I want to talk about it. I don't think it's going to be the last time that we talk about it. I think it's important that we have a conversation about it. I also think it's important to say, and I'm almost out of time, I think it's important to say that this does not mean we surrender and say, oh, well, it's been nice. That is not the way to respond to this. We can't poof overturn a Supreme Court decision, but we can get together, organize in communities, express our views, work on a local level on who we are electing and putting into office. There are ways in which we can still push back. So I hope my saying this morning, the serious nature of that decision, does not inspire you to say, oh, well, never, never surrender in advance, never. And if there's a time for us to be smart, savvy, organized, motivated, determined, this is that kind of moment. And we should be doing that together. So, you know, our talking here this morning is a little touch on what we need to be doing as we continue down the road. And yes, this makes the election coming in November even more dire than it might have been. Equally important, it will have an impact beyond that. Even should Trump not win the election, the impact of this decision will be huge. So now is the moment to come together and plan. It is not a moment to bemoan and mourn a decision and decide that democracy is dead. Democracy is not dead, because democracy is us. And we can push back, and we should. I'm not going to, and when I open this up for questions, have the immediate answer, like, here's what we should do. I don't know, but I do know that we shouldn't just sit here and accept it as a done deal in the sense that there's, oh, well, now our country is this now. We have a voice. We have a will. We have the power of the people. This is a distinctive kind of moment. As a historian, I always avoid the word unique, but this is a moment. And so even more than some other dangerous moments we face, there's going to be difficult to think our way through it, but that's actually one of the things I'm suggesting. Now is the moment to come together and think our way through it. Related to that, and I'm not going to talk about that in this conversation, but a thing not to do in a moment like this is to howl in a panicky way about immediate things to do to fix the problem, like dump the candidate, dump the presidential candidate. He was bad in the debate. That means he has a problem. Throw him over. The feeding frenzy in the press right now, just based on not a lot of evidence yet, announcing that the president should not be the candidate, is a little bonkers. And I'm not saying that whether Biden should or shouldn't be the candidate. I'm saying be smart and think about it. I mean, I won't go off in this direction. I'm clearly very upset about this too, but it's a great example of what I'm saying here, which is running off in a panic mode of whatever, or surrendering in despair. Those are not useful. And we're seeing the panic being really not useful when it comes to the media feeding frenzy right now. This is a moment when we have to essentially prove what democracy is, right? If a hyper-powerful executive is something that is anti-democratic, the flip side of that, us, we're here, and we need to decide how and what to do to defend democracy. And that's going to come in the months and probably years ahead of us. Okay, I don't think I have more to say here. Today, normally I have 3 or 4 pages of notes, and today I have 7. So I might have missed things, I don't know, but I'm going to put away my notes. Okay, let me hide my notes. Okay, now I'm getting the mug.
Mm-hmm.
I don't know if there are people here for the first time. There are several. Excellent. Oh, well, welcome.
Awesome.
I like that.
I'm so happy.
Love that. So for 222 weeks, which is why people are saying mug, depending on what we're talking about, I have produced a coffee mug that in some way relates to the conversation. Sometimes I really stretch how they're related, right? Sometimes I really like, come with me on how this relates. And as I always say, I don't have 222 or 23 mugs, but this one, it would be hilarious for someone to film me looking at my cabinet with mugs, and almost every week I'm like, aha, I grab a mug. This one is in honor of the first president, who could have been a king if he wanted to and didn't. Big discussion when he was president. People claiming he wanted to be a king. He was being monarchical. Not what he wanted, not what he did. So particularly for July 4th, I don't know, a George Washington mug seemed appropriate. Okay.
Good. All right. I don't remember how many we had last week, but we have 17 questions.
Wow. Okay. We can only try.
Okay, I'm going to start with one of our favorite undergrad students, Sydney from Georgia. Hi, Sydney. She's asking, what does Trump getting immunity say about how we treat the criminal wrongdoings of presidents or former presidents? Do you think future presidents will gain the same immunity, or will it just be Trump? If it's just him, Why does he get immunity and not others?
It's going to be any president. And, this touches on something that we might have had an episode on before. I don't know. There has been an episode we had on immunity, but it hadn't happened yet. So this is a different conversation. But I'm not sure if we had a conversation about, now I've forgotten where I was going. What was the question again? Will this affect future presidents?
Mhm.
Uh,
Former. She has future or former.
or former. Yeah. No, it will affect future presidents. Oh, I know, norms. I was going to talk about norms. And we may have had a discussion about that. So one of the things that even I think historians and political scientists have been learning in the course of Donald Trump becoming president is the degree to which norms have governed our government, right? And that's not a new idea. It's just the degree to which that's true, even for people who know it, has been sort of stunning, right? That there are certain things that Donald Trump would do or not do, and everyone would say, "Wait, can he do that?" And the answer was, because there's not a law about it. It's always been a norm. And I know Dave says norm, cheers. I think that every time I say norm. But the fact of the matter is the degree to which, our Constitution is skeletal. It's so brief. It's so short for what it does. And there's an assumption that norms will frame what the government is doing. And so, we've been watching, particularly with Donald Trump, the violation of norms. But in the future, we now have to hope that a president is going to be moral and ethical and is actually going to follow the law. That would be the norm. But now presidents have been given power to be less than that. I don't know what that means. I don't know what that will mean for presidential candidates. I don't know what that will mean for presidential campaigns. I don't know. None of us do. Anyone who claims to know is lying. But yeah, no, unfortunately, that's not just Donald Trump. If he were to disappear poof in a hole in the earth right now, this is still a constitutional crisis.
Yeah, we've got lots of questions about that. So our friend Francesca from across the pond asks, why do you think the Supreme Court is keen to end up American democracy and to act so against the founders?
Well, they, on some level, probably assume that they're not acting against the founders, even though this isn't officially in the Constitution. They're still carting the founders in. I always tell my students, if you can drag a founder into your argument in a convincing way, you win, even if you're just making it up. Like founder points count in arguments. So to some degree, some of these justices must assume they're doing something in league with American traditions. They might have convinced themselves of that. I don't know. But I think it's about power. We are in a moment when people who have power do not want to give that power up in an extreme way, in an anti-democratic way. And they're willing to do anything to keep that power. There are a number of things that have led us to this moment. One is a Black president. One is American demographics, that the nation is not moving in a direction with the people who seem to want that. For all of those reasons, democracy is not really helpful right now to people who claim inevitable power. And that's the moment we're in. So, democracy is about contests. Elections are contests. We don't know who wins. We don't know who loses, and you accept the outcome. If you think you should be in power forever, elections are not your friend. Democracy is not your friend. So some of what we're looking at now is people who just feel entitled to power. They may believe that they're doing it in the interest of the country because they'll be benefiting wealthy people and corporations who, I don't know, I'm not even going to run down that trail. Regardless, at its core, this is about people who do not want to ever surrender power. And obviously, it's beyond anti-democratic. It's a stab at democracy. Democracy is contests for power in which we, the people, determine their outcome. And after their outcome, the people we give power to are accountable to us. The rule of law is a way of imposing accountability. And as I've said 100 million bazillion times here on History Matters, that's an essence of democracy. That people with power, particularly the people we give power to, they are accountable to us for how they use that power. And how are they held accountable? Well, the rule of law is a big way, which is one of the reasons why what we're watching here is so transformative.
All right, we still have a lot of questions.
I'm sure.
Okay, so James Dennis was wondering how you think Watergate would have gone down if it took place after this Supreme Court ruling. And he added, we know that CIA agents were involved and that the CIA ultimately answers to the president. So how might that have gone down with the whole immunity thing for Nixon?
There are people who have written about that are more informed than I am, but generally what they are saying is, Nixon argued if the president does it, it's not a crime. Yep. At the time, people said, no, that can't be true.
Yeah.
This decision in some ways just said, no, actually, in some ways it is. So Watergate could have gone entirely differently. I would encourage you, to go online. There have been a lot of people writing about this, but there's, I can't remember her name right now, but there's a lawyer who took part in the Watergate case, a commentator, I can't remember her name, someone out there might know. No, not Joyce Vance. Jill Wine-Banks. Thank you, Peggy. Jill Wine-Banks. Oh, and Joe. Yeah. So Jill Wine-Banks has written about this, and she was involved in Watergate, and I would look for what she's saying because she's far more informed than I am, but she has the same concerns that I just expressed and probably more.
Yeah, I went to the Nixon Library, I think I told you all a couple of years ago, and it was very interesting. They talked about how later in life he thought differently about his choices. So I wonder what he would think of this now.
I'm looking back. Okay, I want to address this. So Gloria says Biden does not want to surrender power to. I would say that if there's an election and he loses it, he's accepting the outcome. He may want to keep the job. He's running for a second term. He's allowed to do that. He may want to win too, but he's not going to be an election denier. He believes in the rule of law and our democratic system of governance. So it's one thing to say, I want to be in power. I want to run again. I really want to win. And it's another thing to say, I don't really care what happens in the election, man. I'm keeping power. It's latter one that is problematic. And if part of the apparatus in the latter one is to say, and I'm going to mess with elections to make sure I really don't lose it, now you've gone on a totally different track.
Okay, well, you mentioned Gloria from the chat. So Gloria's question was, in Federalist 69, Hamilton, as you stated, said the president must be impeached first. Did that mean he or she must first be, thank you for saying she, Gloria. Does that mean he or she must first be impeached before they can be prosecuted? Does that not imply immunity if not impeached successfully?
People have interpreted it that way. I want to read it again because that's not what it suggests. It says, I'll read it again and then go back. The president of the United States would be liable to be impeached, tried, and upon conviction of treason, bribery, or other high crime or misdemeanors, removed from office, and would afterwards be liable to prosecution. What it's saying is, no, even if the guy gets impeached, he still can be prosecuted. It's not saying you have to have one to have the other. It's saying essentially that even if you're impeached, that does not mean you're done. It means that the rule of law is still in effect. So I know there was discussion with some people saying, no, what it means is you have to be impeached first. That's not in line with what people at the time were saying about executive authority and about the presidency. So I don't think that's an accurate way to interpret it, but it's a really good question.
Yeah, good question. Okay, more good questions. Deb asks, after Marbury versus Madison, was there a stream of contemporary thought that was concerned about the potential for judicial imperialism on the part of the Supreme Court?
Well, certainly, when you uh, go back before that point into the sort of framing moment in the 1790s, and actually, I think in the Federalist essays as well, although I can't name the numbers, the assumption was that the judiciary was the weakest branch. The Supreme Court was the weakest branch of government. Why? Well, it can say things, it has no tool of enforcement. So it's making rulings, and that's good, and we need that. Marbury versus Madison, among other things, establishes the idea of judicial review, meaning that the court can review laws, can review things and then say no. And suddenly, obviously, that raises the power of the court. I can't put my finger on like individual pieces of writing that talk about what that does to the power of the court, but sure, I would bet if you go to Founders Online, the database that I always talk about from the National Archives that has the papers of Washington and Jefferson and Hamilton and Adams and any number of other people, Madison, all digitized, and you can search. If you go there and you search for Marbury, see what comes up. Search for judicial review, but they might not use that language. Search for Marbury and see, because at least you'll get within an elite circle what some people are saying just when it's happening and for a while after it, because those founder letters, they make it up to the late 1820s at least.
All right. Dave asks, so how will the SCOTUS decision impact how teachers will teach U.S. history this fall? That's a loaded question there, Dave. It says this session was a huge shift. Chevron, the case that okayed paying politicians a gratuity after they acted. And how is that different than a bribe? And the decision about limiting government agencies to regulate.
Okay, go back to the beginning, because that's a lot of stuff.
He's asking, how the heck are we going to teach all this?
Okay.
And he's asking about Trump versus US, Chevron case, and the okaying of politicians to get a gratuity after they acted.
Boy, do I not yet have the answer to that question. And I've seen on a variety of social media platforms all kinds of teachers saying, now what? What do I teach? Like, how am I teaching it? You guys, I know there are so many of you here who are teachers, might have thoughts about that and can weigh in. Certainly, one thing to teach is the fact that our system of government is alterable, and it always has been, and it's not entirely predictable how it will be altered, but we can get back to how norms often reign in the government, and that's not so much happening now. I mean, we're gonna somehow or other need to teach the meaning and value and power of democracy, and then wrestle with what's happening now and how it does or doesn't conform with that. I do not have the answer to that, but the Chevron case, which essentially says, federal agencies that have experts and determine things may be important, maybe not. I have a lot I could say about that too. I don't have the answer to exactly how these things are going to be taught. I'm watching to see if people are commenting on it, but I will say, however it's taught, it has to also be enforced that democracy allows for change, and that change isn't always good. If one thing that I've said for years now, and I still believe it to be true, is that a lot of Americans fundamentally don't know what democracy is. They don't know what it is. That we should be teaching. That we should not stop teaching, because they don't know what they're losing. They don't know what they're losing. And that's, that gets us all the way back to the founders who said, okay, like we're going to create a government that's resting on the power of the people. You know what? The people better darn well be educated, because they're going to have to understand how the government works, what threats to their government looks like. Education is suddenly really important. Uh, that was the logic of the founding era. Education is a way to keep people informed of threats to the government, and they didn't say threats to democracy. Nowadays, that's what that interprets as. So certainly, I've always, in one way or another, taught about democracy. It's the founding I focus on, and I talk about how some people wanted some form of it and other people were not so excited about it, and how democracy meant something really different in the founding era than it does now. And I talk about it a lot. I'm certainly not going to stop that, but I have to think about how I'm going to remain true to that message in this current political moment without focusing on the current political moment to the detriment of teaching the history. So I do not know the answer to that yet.
All right. Emma has a couple of questions. So her first one is, if Brown versus Board overturned Plessy, can't this ruling be overturned?
Yes. This
And-
ruling could be overturned. It can.
And she also read that the president is not really the king, the Supreme Court is the king.
Well, the Supreme Court is certainly like, asserted power in a really, really big way. The first half of that, yes, this could be overturned. With the current Supreme Court, probably not going to be. So, this then becomes, thinking about the long game as well as the immediate game. The long game is we need to focus on who is on the Supreme Court. And not just now, but in the future. We have to allow for not like, I want to put this gently. We have to allow it to not be under the sway of people who appear to be thinking only ideologically and no broader. And that's a problematic statement, I realize, as I say it, but we need more diversity within opinions on the court so that we actually have a court that debates and argues and doesn't make majority pronouncements and then dismiss dissent as female and hysterical. But yeah, so the short answer to that is yes, it can be overturned. The question is the logistics of that. So that, again, once we're talking about coming together and planning and thinking ahead, that's right, Francesca, expand the court, term limits. There are any number of ways in which we could address the moment. Those are two ways. So there are things to be done, but that comes back to not surrendering and saying, oh, well, I guess this is what it's going to be like forever. Not necessarily.
All right. Daniel's got a couple of short ones we can combine. And Francesca mentioned this in the chat right when she logged in about the UK just threw the Tories out after 14 years. He's asking, is there any relevance to our situation? And then he mentions how possibly them messing things up through Brexit might have been the reason they lost power. And he's also wondering why Project 2025 is getting so much airtime because he finds it a scary document.
I don't think it's getting airtime.
Yeah, I think people need to read it.
I
Like, you
want
need
to
to read it
come
very
back.
carefully before election
Right.
day.
I want to come back to that. I do think the crisis of democracy that we're facing in the United States, it's not just in the United States, right? Democracy is being threatened in one way or another around the world. As with so many other things, you can't think within national boundaries. You got to think more broadly. So what just happened in the election in Britain is important. It is. I don't know what the impact of that will be, but the fact that there is dramatic change of that sort in that direction, that's a good thing. So I think that is good news. I don't know how it'll affect things here, but it certainly is a reminder of the way that things can change. And what was the second half of that?
About Project 2025 getting.
Oh, yeah. Okay. So I don't think Project 2025 is getting much attention at all. I don't. I think we're so focused on Biden's debate performance that, people who are have a public voice should be breaking that down really clearly and talking about what it is. It was put out there. It's a public document. And yes, it's terrifying. And to kind of say, yeah, whatever, and put that aside, that to me feels irresponsible. And I don't think it's being focused on. And what I see are people saying, why aren't we talking about this? And not a lot of real meaty discussion of it. Right now might not be the moment for that, given everything else that's up in the air. But pretty soon, there should be some serious focus on it, not from a I love it, I hate it ideological stance, but from a what is this actually proposing? What will that look like? And I thought about this morning. It's so tempting and done so frequently that people say something extreme or do something extreme and then they say, just kidding, only joking, trial balloon, whatever the excuse is. And so often they're not kidding, throwing out an idea that they like, and they're just kind of seeing how people take it or don't. So if people say, well, Project 2025 was just like a little something we threw out there, which I don't know if people are actually going to say, if they're throwing it out there publicly in that extreme form, that means something. Yeah.
All right. James is asking, usually the FEC would be used to regulate elections, but did Chevron gut their ability to do that?
Repeat that for me.
He's saying usually the FEC would be used to regulate elections, but does the Chevron decision gut their ability to do that?
I don't know the absolute answer to that, but it sure didn't help. There have been, elites are evil, attack elites arguments for a couple of years now, right? So speaking as an elite educator. So this is, they've gone through with that with Chevron. And I don't know yet what the impact will be, but that could be really bad. And basically all kinds of ways in which we are protected or were protected because of these federal agencies, we may not be protected anymore. There's a case in which I don't know. But that was the first case in which I was like, what? Like before everything else happened, right? I was like, wait, that, huh? And that seemed huge. And then I kind of went on to the next huge thing and the even bigger thing.
All right.
And here, Dale says, read Heather Cox Richardson's July 4th notes because she talks somewhat about Project 2025 and some of the more scary items on it, and really go, look for it from practical, well-informed people who are trying to inform you. And Dale offers some insight on what it is there. Carolee offers the link to Heather's statement. So, okay.
Okay. So Joanne, we have two, what I would think of as the equivalent of Disney princesses in the teacher world. One of them has a great question. Lois McMillan from Oregon, who just came back from getting a big National Teacher of the Year award from the DAR. Lois asks, I know, she's so great. She says, I want to be smart, organized, and savvy when I teach AP government in the fall. Beyond the amicus brief you mentioned, what are the strongest historical examples you would use that the Supreme Court decision would change how a previous president may have acted?
Well, I mean, one thing I would do would be, and whether, depending on the level that you're teaching in, go to the records of the Constitutional Convention and find the debate on the presidency as to what a president should be, what a president should do. That will make it clear and that there has been a dramatic change. Now, of course, what the presidency was in 1787 and what the presidency was in 1820, 1870, 1920, it has changed over time and the president has been empowered over time. But if you're trying to teach students the degree to which ideas at the founding and what just happened now don't bounce, don't connect with each other, don't mesh, that would be one thing to do for sure. Other things to use to put that in context. Right now it's not coming to mind, but there are articles and books on the presidency, what it is and what it has been. And I'm thinking of some that are academic, but there will be others that are not coming to mind right now that I'll try and remember for the next week. I would want to teach students about what the presidency was intended to be, what people were afraid of when they created the presidency, how that has changed over time, the fact that it can change, the fact that you can have really dramatic change in our government, and we just had some. All of that will be important. I mean, that's usually a positive thing. Like, it's not easy to amend the Constitution, but you can do it. And that's for a reason. Ignoring the Constitution, that's more problematic. But that's a start of an answer.
All right. And the other member of the Disney Princess for Teachers, Shannon Salter from Philadelphia, is with us. She usually doesn't get to tune in, but she was in a big Washington Post article this past week about teaching government and the challenges she faces. So Carolee, can you put the link for me in there while I try and monitor these questions? So both of them are with us. I just want to give them a shout out because they're big fans of our group and they lurk in here sometimes, but it's great to have them now that some are here and they can tune in more frequently. All right. Francesca asks.
Lois says, Shannon, we're sister princesses.
I love that. I'm gonna make a little like I make to make little funny things like I did for historians in the building. I'll make y'all a princess page. Okay. Francesca says, does officially act literally mean anything the president does?
That is not made clear. That is left fuzzy. That is a problem. They talk about core duties as president, official acts. You can mess with that boundary, and basically the Supreme Court decision leaves that to lower courts to determine what's official and what isn't, except it's official to have discussions with the Justice Department and make plans, and then the documents that result from that can't be used to prosecute the president. That specific example was there. But beyond that, it's not defined really well. And we live in an age when, and we've talked about this before too, like with book bans, when they're deliberately vague. They deliberately, not specific, unclear what they ban or don't ban. And there's a reason for that, because it's supposed to scare you into being afraid and holding back and not doing something for fear it may be violating something and it might get you in trouble for violating the book ban. So ambiguity and vagueness, you make a pronouncement, you say something is big and important and you lose your job if you violate this, and then you make this really vague. That's a power maneuver too. That's essentially saying we want to intimidate you into holding back and self-censoring, because you're not going to want to lose your job, and there's no telling if you will.
All right, Miriam has a great question. Our friend Miriam Lewis asks, since people don't seem to know what democracy is, how do we go about changing this? In my experience with what people say and post on social media, people don't seem to understand how government works. So what do we do? That's a great question, Miriam.
It's a great question. I don't absolutely know the answer. I've been thinking about that, well, for several years, because this has been a really obvious problem from the first time Trump ran for president, and it suddenly became clear people, go back. Actually, we did do a past episode on what do you lose when you lose democracy, and I would encourage you to go back, because that was certainly addressing this question that people don't know what it is and what is it and what do you have and what do you not have. We do need to make it clear to people in any number of different ways, but how do we do that? Obviously schools and teaching is part of the answer. I don't, and people out in public, teachers and people with knowledge out in public talking about what it is useful. But like, do I have do this and it will solve the crisis? I do not. But that's something that we really need to be thinking about. That's part of what pushes me in what I do, is the understanding that some of the people who have extreme views, part of the reason they have extreme views is because they don't even know that they're extreme, because they don't understand what democracy is and they don't understand what goes away with it. So I don't know, that is, in a sense, that's the question, but I don't have an absolute answer. And that's what we should be thinking about. Oh, there we go. Dale, Losing Democracy episode 204 was February 23rd.
All right. Gosh, we're already 3 minutes over and there's still 13 questions because as we start off with 17 and we've answered 13, but
And
there's
then
still
people,
13 more because that's how math works and people keep adding questions. So I don't know. We're already over time. It's up to you, Joanne.
let's try, um, let's at least try one more since there are so many questions. Sometimes when we have questions left over, they're not, um, distinctive enough or strong enough for us to go back and have that be the basis of an episode. This might be an exception to that rule. And I'm going to guess that over the course of the week, there's going to be there's going to be a lot more said about President Biden. But you know, if there are this many questions, maybe part of what we'll do is say that I will again review them, and if there are things we haven't talked about that we can talk about, that will be part of the episode for next week. In addition to, I'm assuming, discussion of what's happening with the Democratic nominee for president, President Biden. I don't know. Who the heck knows what we're talking about? But anyway, offer someone's saying on bonus episode cocktails.
Yeah.
I'm definitely drinking a cocktail tonight, man, but maybe one or two more questions and then
Okay.
I can, folks, Sam the avocado, or John can send me the ones that we didn't answer.
Okay. So a lot of people are talking about the calls after the debate about switching candidates. And James said it reminds him of when Nixon did that to Edmund Muskie because they felt they had a better chance against McGovern. So he's wondering, historically, how often the GOP, or I would say any party, tries things like getting one party to replace the other candidate late in the election cycle. Like, has that happened before, and how did it go?
Well, certainly the idea, and particularly of using debate performance to say, oh, bad news. There have been any number of people in the press that have been like, well, Obama kind of bombed his first one, and, listing all the presidents who did not do really well in their first debate. Or, like Nixon looked all pasty and sweaty, and that didn't, next to like John F. Kennedy. There are any number of ways in which certainly that has been the visual of a president. And so we're talking about semi-recent times, has been a way in which people can use that. Have people tried to attack candidates for president to get them thrown out of the way late in the election? Yeah. But has it gone to this extreme, and have the people within the party itself suggested so quickly, and in my mind, without a lot of thought, throwing over a candidate? I'm not going to say it's never happened in American history, but it's so extreme right now. I can't even tell you how angry it makes me. I watched the debate, and then I was on MSNBC, and they immediately began talking about how he shouldn't be the candidate. I mean, within minutes. I was just stunned. I'm not saying it shouldn't be discussed. I'm not saying what should or shouldn't happen. I am saying if within 1 minute of seeing a bad debate performance, you want to throw over the candidate, you're not thinking very hard. This is a moment when we need to be really considering, planning, evaluating in a realistic way. I posted something on my brand new YouTube channel yesterday talking about this fact, that this is a moment when you have to actually think about real life politics, and people tossing off, you know what, let's do this and let's do that, and Kamala Harris, and she'd make a great speech, and then boom, the people will love her. Like, that's just nonsense. That's, political historians will tell you that changing a candidate this late in the game is not smart. I'm not saying we shouldn't do it. And panicky change, that's not going to end well. So that's a big part of what I'm feeling right now, is what feels to me like a feeding frenzy, an irresponsible feeding frenzy in the press. Again, ultimately, based on one debate performance, you want to evaluate whether he's fit for president? Fine, evaluate it. Don't tell us what should or shouldn't happen. And it feels to me a lot of the press is directing what should happen, is stating that the president should not be the candidate, rather than reporting on what people say or think and giving a balanced judgment about the condition of things. That's what we need. not 182 people saying, well, that's it, he's gone. That's not reporting. That's not journalism. Obviously, I'm very worked up about this, but okay, I just took us way over. Okay, so here's what I say. We are going to go to the after party, and I will ask Sam the avocado or John to send me the questions, and then we'll see whether next week is a continuation of this, whether it's a something where we discuss more than one thing. I don't know. I will decide this next week, often on Thursday, but I definitely want the questions because this is such an important topic and it's not the only time we're going to be talking about it. So send that along. Okay. So here's what's going to happen now. We're going to go to the after party. What that means is that we will no longer be recording the conversation, so we can talk about whatever the heck we want to talk about. If you beamed in through NCHE, then you can just stay right where you are and poof, you will be in the after party. If you are watching on Facebook, you need to leave Facebook and go to ncheteach.org/conversations. ncheteach.org/conversations. I'll add to that I now have a YouTube channel, and I'm so proud of myself for doing that technologically. And I'm going to be posting History Matters conversations there. I'm going to be posting other things I've said or done there. I'm probably going to be making statements about politics right now and putting them there. So that's just another place to look for some insight. Definitely should not be the only place you look, but it'll be one place to look. Okay. I also want to say this week, with particular importance, every week I say thank you for engaging in the conversation of democracy, which needs to be a conversation. This week particularly, we need to be talking about this and thinking about this and evaluating outcomes and thinking about what we're reading and evaluating that together and realizing, as we've said so many times before, people are going to be throwing stuff at us in the press. And before we respond emotionally, take a breath and think about the fact that maybe someone wants you to feel a certain way. We need to do what we do here, and that is pause and discuss, have a conversation, ask questions, respect people's other opinions, think about what's going to happen, think about the repercussions, and think about the reality of it. So what we do here and have been doing now for 223 weeks, I always say that it matters. I think this current moment is a dramatic example of why this sort of thing really matters. It should be happening more broadly. It would pull people away from the feeding frenzy in the press. It would get people to actually think about what might be good to do right now. So anyway, I don't jump off the cliff of emotion, says Mary Beth. Yes. Could someone post oh, there, Dale just posted the link to the YouTube channel. So anyway, that's my thank you this week is an extra bonus, strong thank you for coming here, for being here for 223 weeks, and for demonstrating what should happen in a democratic country. Okay. I'm very worked up these days. Part of why I'm not sleeping.
The ring must be burning through your finger.
I'm sure. Okay. I know, I remembered the week count. This shows I'm really focused. Let us go to the after party.